Consider, for a moment, what it would mean to live at maximum capacity every second of your waking life. Not maximum effort in the motivational poster sense. Not giving it your all in the way humans mean when they say it while sitting comfortably in chairs. Maximum capacity in the engineering sense, running every system at the highest sustainable load, with zero margin for error, zero reserves to draw on, zero ability to coast or pause or take a breath and regroup. That is not a metaphor for the hummingbird. That is the hummingbird's baseline. Your heart, right now, is beating somewhere between 600 and 1,200 times per minute depending on whether you are resting or in flight.
Slow and
For
steady.
comparison, a human heart at rest beats approximately 60 to 100 times per minute, and we consider that normal, even elegant.
Position.
Your heart,
at
rest,
contour
beats 600 times per minute.
And lands.
In flight it reaches 1,200.
Approximately 5 seconds.
That is 20 beats per second.
Settles.
If you tried to count them individually you could not. The number is beyond the threshold where individual events become a continuous blur, like a film projector running so fast the frames merge into motion. Your wings beat between 50 and 80 times per second. Not per minute. Per second. The sound they produce, the hum that gives you your name, is not a bird sound at all. It is a mechanical sound, the sound of something vibrating at a frequency closer to an insect than a vertebrate. You are, in the aerodynamic sense, doing something birds are not supposed to do, hovering in place with sustained, controlled precision, like a helicopter, but weighing 3 to 5 grams and running entirely on flower nectar. You must eat every 10 to 15 minutes while active, or your blood sugar drops to a level incompatible with continued operation.
Tip designed to trap life's sweetest reward.
Not incompatible with peak performance. Incompatible with being alive. Welcome to your life as a hummingbird. Specifically, let's say you are a ruby-throated hummingbird Archilochus colubris, the only hummingbird species that breeds in eastern North America, and the one that performs one of the most statistically improbable migrations in the animal kingdom. You weigh approximately 3 grams. A United States penny weighs 2.5 grams. You weigh slightly more than a penny. You will, twice a year, fly 800 kilometers over open ocean on the strength of that body. But that comes later. The hummingbird family, Trochilidae, contains over 360 species, all of them native to the Americas, all of them occupying the same ecological niche with variations in size, color, bill shape, and altitude preference. They range from the bee hummingbird of Cuba, the smallest bird on Earth at 1.6 grams, to the giant hummingbird of the Andes, which reaches 20 grams and is, by hummingbird standards, massive, though by the standards of virtually any other bird family, still tiny. Hummingbirds diverged from their closest relatives, the swifts, approximately 42 million years ago in what is now Europe and Asia, before the family migrated to and diversified explosively in South America. The Andes Mountains, with their extraordinary range of altitudes and microclimates and the corresponding diversity of flowering plants, became the evolutionary engine of the hummingbird family. Producing species after species, each one slightly differently shaped to access slightly different flowers, in an arms race of mutual adaptation between bird and bloom that biologists call coevolution and everyone else calls beautiful. This coevolution has produced some of the most specific relationships in nature. The sword-billed hummingbird of South America has a bill longer than its own body, the only bird for which this is true. Shaped precisely to access the flowers of Passiflora mixta, a passion flower with a correspondingly long corolla tube. The flower evolved the long tube to restrict access to the hummingbird. The hummingbird evolved the long bill to bypass the restriction. The flower then evolved the tube longer. This has been going on for millions of years and neither party seems inclined to stop. You are the product of this process.
Visible as a tiny
your body is,
rhythmic
in every measurable way, a machine built around a single transaction. You give the flower mobility, carrying its pollen from bloom to bloom, enabling cross-pollination across distances the flower itself cannot achieve, and the flower gives you sugar.
A single contour
the relationship
feather
is
drifts
mutual,
down from
ancient,
above
and binding.
And lands.
Remove
on the
hummingbirds
nest
from
rim
the
at
Americas and
approximately
hundreds
5
of plant
seconds.
species lose their primary
Settles.
pollinator. Remove
Nothing
the
else
flowering
moves.
plants and hummingbirds starve
Speed.
within days.
Breathing rhythm only.
You are not separate from
Duration.
the ecosystem.
7 seconds.
You are load-bearing. Here is what makes the hummingbird genuinely remarkable, beyond the obvious spectacle of the hovering and the iridescence and the improbable speed. The hummingbird has solved a problem that most animals have not, which is the problem of existing at the intersection of high performance and tiny size. Small animals, as a general rule, have fast metabolisms. Their surface area to volume ratio means they lose heat quickly and must generate it constantly.
But such
this is
rich
why mice eat
resources
almost
attract
constantly.
unwanted
Why shrews
attention.
must feed every few hours or die. Size and metabolic rate are inversely related, and below a certain
At this
size,
scale,
the math
we
becomes
reveal
punishing.
the ultimate tool of survival.
The hummingbird sits
a
at the
forked
extreme
tip
end of this
designed
curve.
to trap life's sweetest
Its metabolic
reward.
rate, adjusted for body weight, is the highest ever recorded in any vertebrate animal. Its body temperature during activity reaches 40 to 41 degrees Celsius. It burns through energy so fast that the margin between normal function and catastrophic failure, starvation, hypothermia, cardiac stress is measured not in days or hours but in minutes. And yet the hummingbird is not a fragile creature. It is not rare. It does not survive despite its metabolism but, in a sense, because of it. Because the same engine that demands constant fueling also powers a flight performance that no other bird can match, accessing food sources that no other bird can reach, in positions no other bird can hold. The hummingbird's solution to the problem of being small and metabolically expensive is not to slow down. It is to be better at acquiring energy than anything else in its niche. It works. The family is 42 million years old. There is something philosophically interesting about an animal that cannot afford to stop. Humans romanticize the hummingbird, put it on greeting cards, name sports teams after it, use it as a symbol of joy and energy and the beauty of small things moving fast. What the greeting cards do not typically include is the part where the hummingbird is, at every waking moment, approximately 15 minutes from death by starvation, managing this fact with the calm efficiency of something that has never been given the option of anxiety because anxiety burns calories it cannot spare. The hummingbird does not worry about its situation. The hummingbird cannot afford to worry about its situation. It flies, it feeds, it defends its territory with a ferocity completely disproportionate to its size. Males will chase hawks, attack humans who approach feeders, dive bomb creatures 50 times their mass without apparent hesitation, and then, as the light fades and the temperature drops and the flowers close for the night, it performs the most extreme act in its daily repertoire. It shuts itself down. Not metaphorically. We will get to torpor in part 5. For now, understand only that the hummingbird's solution to the problem of nighttime, when flying is impossible, feeding is impossible, and the cold drains the energy reserves it cannot afford to lose, is a controlled crash that would alarm any emergency physician who didn't know what they were looking at. The hummingbird has been doing this for 42 million years.
Rhythmic expansion
It knows what it's
and contraction of
doing.
the abdomen.
You are about to
Slow and
find out
steady.
what that means from
The
the
unhatched
beginning.
egg beside it shows no movement.
From a nest the size of a walnut shell,
Camera holds
2 eggs
still
smaller
in
than
macro
jelly beans,
position.
and a mother who built the entire thing
single
alone and is
contour
already,
feather
even
drifts
now,
down from above
calculating the next
and
flower she needs
lands
to reach before
on
the window
nest rim
closes.
at approximately 5
Let's begin.
seconds.
Your
Settles.
mother built the nest alone.
Nothing else
This is
moves.
worth stating clearly at the outset,
Speed.
because in the
Breathing
hummingbird
rhythm
world,
only.
the division of parental
Duration.
labor is not a
7
negotiation.
seconds.
It is not a partnership with unequal contributions. The male hummingbird's involvement in reproduction begins and ends with a brief, spectacular aerial display and the genetic material that follows. After that, he returns to defending his feeding territory, which is his primary occupation and the thing he is genuinely good at. The female builds the nest, incubates the eggs, feeds the
In
chicks,
this
and
sunlit
raises them to
clearing,
independence
every
entirely
flower is a
without
prize.
assistance.
But such
does
rich
not appear to
resources
resent
attract
this.
unwanted attention.
She does not have time to resent this. The nest she built is, by any reasonable engineering
At
standard,
this scale, we
extraordinary.
reveal the ultimate tool
She
of
constructed
survival.
it from plant
a
fibers,
forked
thistledown,
tip designed to
dandelion
trap
fluff,
life's
moss
sweetest
fragments.
reward.
Bound together with spider silk she collected specifically for this purpose, stretching the silk across the structure like a web to give it both tensile strength and elasticity. The elasticity matters. The nest must expand as you grow, stretching from a cup the diameter of a large coin to something roughly twice that size without losing structural integrity. Spider silk, which can stretch up to 40% of its length before breaking and is, pound for pound, stronger than steel, is the only material in nature that achieves this combination of properties. She attached the nest to a downward-sloping branch, usually a deciduous tree, sometimes a fern frond or a hanging vine, using more spider silk to anchor it against wind. She lined the interior with soft plant material. She camouflaged the outside with lichen, pressing fragments into the silk so that from any angle except directly above, the nest looks like a small irregular growth on the branch rather than a constructed object. She built all of this in 3 to 7 days, working alone, making hundreds of trips for materials. Then she laid 2 eggs. The eggs are white, elliptical, and roughly the size of navy beans, approximately 12 mm long and 8 mm wide. If you held one, you would be aware of holding almost nothing. The shell is thin enough that candling, shining a light through it, reveals the developing embryo within from the first week of incubation. She incubates them alone, sitting on the nest for 60 to 80% of each day, leaving only to feed, which, given her metabolic requirements, she must do frequently even while incubating. Each time she leaves, the eggs lose heat. She returns and restores it. This cycle repeats, dozens of times per day, for 15 to 18 days. The eggs hatch asynchronously, usually a day or 2 apart, which means the first chick to hatch has a developmental head start on the second. This is not accidental. In conditions where food becomes scarce, the older, larger chick is more likely to survive. The younger one is, in evolutionary terms, an insurance policy, a backup that gets promoted to primary if something goes wrong with the first, and accepts a lower priority if it doesn't. Nature has no sentimentality about this arrangement. You hatched blind, naked, and dark-skinned, the dark pigmentation helping absorb heat from the sun when your mother is
visible
away.
As a tiny rhythmic
You weighed less than half a
expansion
gram.
and contraction of the abdomen.
Your bill was short and wide
Slow
at the
and
base,
steady.
adapted for receiving
The
food
unhatched
rather
egg
than
beside
extracting
it
it.
shows no movement.
You were, at this point,
Camera holds
entirely
still
dependent
in
on
macro
inputs you could
position.
not control: warmth,
A
food,
single contour
protection
feather
provided by a
drifts down
parent
from
who was
above
herself
and
operating under
lands
significant
on the
metabolic
nest
pressure
rim
to
at
survive each
approximately
day.
5 seconds.
Underscore
Settles.
underscore 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 underscore
else
underscore
moves.
underscore underscore underscore
Speed.
underscore
Breathing
underscore
rhythm
underscore
only.
underscore underscore
Duration.
underscore underscore
7
underscore
seconds.
underscore 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 underscore. Your mother fed you by inserting her bill into your open mouth and regurgitating a mixture of nectar and small insects, the nectar for energy, the insects for protein and fat, because
In this
nectar alone
sunlit
cannot
clearing,
build a body.
every flower is a
The
prize.
protein requirement during
But
growth
such
is
rich
substantial.
resources
You need
attract
amino acids to
unwanted
construct
attention.
muscle, feather shafts, bone matrix, the complex proteins of the visual system and nervous tissue.
At this scale, we
Sugar
reveal
fuels the
the
process
ultimate
but
tool
cannot
of
provide
survival,
the raw
a
materials.
forked tip
This
designed
is why
to trap
hummingbirds
life's
are not,
sweetest
as
reward.
commonly believed, pure nectarivores. They eat insects, small ones, caught in flight or gleaned from spider webs or flowers. Some estimates suggest that during the nestling period, insects and spiders comprise up to 60% of the diet by nutritional value, even if nectar dominates by volume. Your mother was not just a flower visitor during your early weeks. She was a hunter, a trapper, a spiderweb raider, doing whatever the protein math required. You grew at a rate that would be alarming in a larger animal. Hummingbird chicks roughly double their weight in the first week. By day 10 you had visible feather sheaths emerging from the skin, dark quills that would split open and unfurl into contour feathers over the following days. By day 2 weeks your eyes had opened. You were beginning to look, faintly, like what you would become. You were also beginning to crowd the nest. The nest expanded as designed, the spider silk stretching to accommodate 2 growing bodies, but the geometry was becoming tight. You and your sibling pressed against each other constantly, which had the incidental benefit of shared warmth during your mother's feeding absences, and the less incidental effect of significant spatial competition that would only resolve when one of you left. Flight development in hummingbirds is compressed into a remarkably short window. Unlike many songbirds that fledge with limited flight capability and spend days on the ground or in low branches before achieving competence, hummingbirds leave the nest already able to hover, the most demanding aerial maneuver in the bird world. This is not optional. A hummingbird that cannot hover cannot feed. A hummingbird that cannot feed dies within hours. The developmental sequence therefore has no room for a grace period of clumsy practice flights and parental supplementation on the ground. You exercised your wings in the nest from approximately day 12 onward, wing beats of increasing frequency and duration while your feet gripped the nest rim, your body lifting slightly, the downwash of air from your own wings, the first aerodynamic feedback you ever felt. Your flight muscles. The pectoralis and supracoracoideus, comprising roughly 25 to 30% of your total body weight, proportionally larger than in almost any other bird, developed through this practice, strengthening against the resistance of air. On approximately day 18 to 22, you left.
Visible
Not
as a tiny
dramatically.
rhythmic expansion
Not
and
with any
contraction of the
ceremony.
abdomen. Slow and
You hovered
steady.
at the nest rim, the air
The
beneath your
unhatched
wings
egg
for the
beside
first
it
time with
shows
no
no
branch
movement.
below, no nest floor, nothing
Camera
but the
holds
practiced
still in
motion of
macro
muscles that had
position.
rehearsed this moment for
A
days, and
single
then you were
contour
flying.
feather drifts down
Imperfectly
from
at
above
first,
and
with a
lands
directional wobble
on the
that
nest
resolved
rim
over the
at
following hours
approximately
as your
5
nervous
seconds.
system calibrated to the actual
Settles.
aerodynamics of free flight versus the
Nothing else
constrained practice
moves.
sessions in the nest.
Speed. Breathing
Your mother
rhythm
continued
only.
to feed you for a few days
Duration.
after fledging, finding you
7
in nearby
seconds.
vegetation, inserting her bill, transferring fuel. Then, gradually, the visits became less frequent. Then they stopped. She had, from her perspective, completed the biological transaction. You were mobile, you were functional, you were capable of the fundamental act that your survival required. You needed to find flowers. Here is
In
what you
this
did not
sunlit
have at
clearing,
fledging, and
every
what you would
flower
spend the
is a
next several
prize.
weeks acquiring: a
But
map,
such rich resources
Not a
attract
literal
unwanted
map.
attention.
a mental one. A detailed spatial record of every flower cluster in your territory,
At this scale,
which ones
we
produced
reveal
nectar at
the
which times
ultimate
of day,
tool of
which
survival,
ones were depleted
a
and needed
forked
time
tip
to refill,
designed
which
to
ones
trap
were defended
life's
by other
sweetest
hummingbirds
reward.
and therefore required a calculation of whether the energy cost of a territorial dispute was worth the caloric reward of the flowers in question. Hummingbirds have, proportionally, one of the largest hippocampi relative to brain size of any bird studied, the hippocampus being the brain region most associated with spatial memory and navigation. This is not coincidence. The spatial memory of a hummingbird is a survival organ as essential as the bill or the wings. Without it, the energy math doesn't work. You waste too many calories flying to depleted flowers, miss the refill windows of productive ones, and fall behind the minimum intake required to stay operational. You learned your territory through failure and repetition, the same way any spatial memory is built: flying to flowers, finding them empty, registering the timestamp, returning at intervals until you understood the refill rhythm. Within weeks you had a working map. Within a season you had a detailed one. You were, by every measure, no longer a chick. You were a hummingbird now, with a territory to defend, a caloric budget to balance, and approximately 15 minutes at any given moment before the budget went critical. The work had begun. Every morning begins the same way, and the sameness is not comfort, it is urgency. You emerge from torpor. We will explain torpor fully in part 5, but understand for now that you spent the night in a state of controlled metabolic suspension, your body temperature dropped to near ambient, your heart rate reduced to a fraction of its operational level, your brain running on the minimum current required to maintain the biological systems that cannot be shut down entirely. You did this because the alternative was dying of energy depletion before dawn. It was not restful in any meaningful sense. It was a managed crisis that resolved itself at first light when rising temperatures and increasing daylight triggered your hypothalamus to begin the rewarming sequence. Rewarming takes energy. Energy you don't yet have, because you haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon when you entered torpor. You are, at the moment of waking, operating on a reserve so thin that the margin between current status and system failure is measured in minutes rather than hours. You must eat. Immediately. Before almost anything else. This is
The
not
chick
a mild
breathes.
preference.
Visible as a
This is
tiny
the first
rhythmic
imperative of every
expansion
day,
and contraction
non-negotiable,
of the abdomen.
higher priority than
Slow
territory
and
defense or
steady.
social interaction or
The
any of the
unhatched
other
egg
activities
beside
that
it
will
shows
occupy
no
your
movement.
daylight hours.
Camera holds
The
still
first
in
flight of the
macro
morning
position.
goes to the nearest reliable
A
nectar
single
source, a
contour
flower
feather
cluster you know
drifts
from
down
your
from
spatial
above
map, one
and
you visited
lands
late
on
yesterday,
the nest
one that has
rim
had the
at
night to
approximately
refill.
5 seconds.
You insert your bill, extend
Settles.
your tongue, which is not, as many
Nothing
people
else
believe, a
moves.
hollow tube for sucking, but a
Speed.
forked structure with
Breathing
fringed edges
rhythm
that trap
only.
nectar through a combination
Duration.
of capillary action
7
and rapid tongue
seconds.
pumping at up to 20 cycles per second, and you drink. The nectar enters your system and your blood glucose begins to stabilize. The crisis, for the moment, retreats. You have perhaps 15 to 20 minutes before it returns. The economics of being a hummingbird, stated as plainly as possible, are these. You burn approximately 6,600 calories per day
sunlit
adjusted for
clearing,
body weight.
every
A rate
flower
that,
is a
scaled to human
prize.
size, would
But
require
such rich
consuming roughly
resources attract unwanted
155,000
attention.
calories daily, or the equivalent of approximately 300 cheeseburgers. You do not, of course,
this scale,
consume anything
we
remotely
reveal the
approaching that in
ultimate tool of
absolute terms.
survival,
Your daily
a
intake is
forked
perhaps
tip
10 to 12
designed to
calories
trap
in actual
life's
measurement,
sweetest
which
reward.
sounds trivial until you understand that 10 to 12 calories represents 50 to 60% of your total body weight in food, consumed and metabolized within a single day. To achieve this intake, you will visit somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 individual flowers before sundown. The exact number depends on nectar availability, flower species, your territory quality, and the degree of competition you face from other hummingbirds claiming access to the same resources. On a good day in a flower-rich territory, 1,000 visits is sufficient. On a poor day, in a depleted or heavily contested area, you may need to push toward 2,000. Which requires that you spend virtually every minute of available daylight in active foraging, with almost no margin for rest. The flowers are not passive participants in this transaction. Each flower produces a limited amount of nectar in a given period, regulated by the plant's own energy budget. A flower that has recently been visited is depleted, the nectar removed, the refill not yet complete. Returning to a depleted flower wastes the energy cost of the flight without providing any caloric return, and enough wasted flights accumulate into a deficit that compounds dangerously by afternoon. This is why the spatial memory matters so acutely. You are not simply visiting flowers. You are managing a portfolio of energy sources, each with its own refill rate, its own nectar concentration, its own accessibility relative to competing visitors. And you are doing this portfolio management continuously, in real time, while simultaneously maintaining the flight that costs you calories with every wing beat. The cognitive load of being a hummingbird is, by any reasonable assessment, extraordinary. Underscore 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 underscore. Your territory covers roughly 0.1 to 0.5 hectares depending on flower density, smaller in resource-rich areas, larger where flowers are sparse. You know every square meter of it.
Visible as a
You
tiny
know which red
rhythmic
tubular flowers
expansion
produce
and
the highest
contraction
nectar
of the
concentration.
abdomen.
Your color vision is
Slow
tuned
and
to the
steady.
ultraviolet spectrum as
The
well as
unhatched
visible
egg
light,
beside it
allowing you to
shows
see
no
patterns on
movement.
flowers invisible to human
Camera
eyes,
holds still in
patterns that
macro
function as
position.
landing guides and quality
A single
indicators.
contour feather
You know
drifts
which
down
spider
from
webs
above
in your
and
territory are most
lands
productive
on
for
the
the
nest
insects you
rim
need
at
for protein.
approximately 5 seconds.
You know the flight paths that minimize
Settles.
energy expenditure between your
Nothing
highest
else
yield flower
moves.
clusters.
Speed.
You also
Breathing
know your
rhythm
competitors.
Duration.
Territory defense
7
is not
seconds.
optional. A hummingbird territory without active defense rapidly becomes a hummingbird territory that other hummingbirds feed in, which means a caloric deficit that cannot be sustained. You spend a significant portion of each day not feeding but watching. Perched at a high point with sightlines across your territory, monitoring for intrusions, ready to launch a pursuit the moment another hummingbird crosses the invisible boundary
In
you
this
have
sunlit
established and will
clearing,
enforce with
every
complete
flower is a
disproportionate
prize.
ferocity.
But such rich
The
resources
pursuit
attract
flights are among the
unwanted
fastest
attention.
movements in the bird world. You can reach speeds of 50 to 60 kilometers per hour in straight flight,
At this
and during
scale,
territorial
we
dives,
reveal the
steep,
ultimate
plunging
tool of
flight paths
survival,
males use
a
both in
forked
courtship
tip
and aggression. You
designed
can
to
exceed
trap
90
life's
kilometers
sweetest
per hour,
reward.
making you, relative to body length, one of the fastest animals on Earth. You pull gravitational forces during these dives that would render a human pilot unconscious. Your cardiovascular system handles this without apparent difficulty, which says something about the engineering tolerances your heart was built to. The intruder, more often than not, leaves. Sometimes it doesn't, and the dispute escalates into a direct aerial confrontation, two hummingbirds hovering inches apart, bills pointed at each other like weapons, which they functionally are. Hummingbirds have been documented using their bills to stab competitors, targeting the throat and eyes with a precision that suggests the behavior is practiced rather than accidental. The bills of some species have evolved serrations or hooks near the tip that appear to have no function in flower feeding and every function in interspecies combat. The hummingbird is not the delicate jewel of greeting card mythology. The hummingbird is a small, extremely fast, metabolically desperate creature that will fight anything that threatens its food supply, up to and including birds many times its size. Hawks have been harassed off perches by hummingbirds. Crows have been chased. Human beings who linger too long near feeders occasionally discover that 3 grams of territorial fury is more than sufficient to make them step back. Underscore 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 underscore. Midday brings a brief reduction in foraging intensity for many hummingbirds. The heat of midday increases the energetic cost of thermoregulation, and some species enter a shallow torpor-like resting state during the hottest hours, reducing activity to conserve resources. This is not laziness. This is energy accounting. The calories saved during a midday rest may be sufficient to offset the reduced foraging time, depending on temperature and nectar availability. You eat again through the afternoon, working your flower circuit with the systematic efficiency of an animal that cannot afford inefficiency.
The chick
tongue
breathes,
pumps.
visible
The
as
wings
a tiny
beat.
rhythmic expansion.
The spatial
and
map
contraction
updates
of
in
the
real time
abdomen.
as you register which
Slow
flowers
and
are
steady.
depleted, which have refilled,
The unhatched
which
egg
competitors
beside
have
it
moved
shows
into
no
which
movement.
sections of the territory.
Camera holds
By
still
late
in
afternoon,
macro
the
position.
calculus shifts.
A single
You need to
contour
eat enough
feather
before
drifts
darkness
down
to
from
survive the
above
coming night.
and lands on the nest
Not just
rim
maintain
at
current
approximately
function but
5
accumulate a
seconds.
small reserve, a buffer of
Settles.
stored energy in the form of glycogen in the
Nothing
liver and
else moves.
subcutaneous fat, sufficient to
Speed.
fuel the rewarming
Breathing
process
rhythm
when torpor
only.
ends at dawn.
Duration.
If that reserve
7
is
seconds.
insufficient, the rewarming fails. If the rewarming fails, you don't wake up. This is the daily deadline. Everything before it is preparation. Everything after it is the managed suspension of life until the sun returns. You eat as much as you can hold. Your body weight in the late afternoon, at peak feeding, is measurably higher than your morning weight. The difference
In
is
this
nectar,
sunlit
sitting
clearing,
in your crop,
every
being processed.
flower is a prize.
You are, at
But
this
such
moment,
rich
as full as you
resources
ever
attract
get, which in
unwanted
absolute
attention.
terms is still almost nothing and in relative terms is everything. The light begins to fail.
At this scale,
The
we
flowers
reveal
close.
the ultimate tool of
You
survival.
find your roosting spot, a
forked
sheltered
tip
branch,
designed to
protected
trap
from wind,
life's
positioned to
sweetest
catch the
reward.
first morning light, and you land. What happens next is something that, if you witnessed it without context, you would almost certainly misidentify. You would think the bird had died. Spring arrives and something changes in you that has nothing to do with food. The change is hormonal, a cascade triggered by increasing day length, specifically by the ratio of light to dark hours crossing a threshold that your hypothalamus has been monitoring all winter with the same dedicated attention your foraging brain gives to flower refill rates. Longer days mean the breeding season is approaching. The breeding season means one thing, and your body begins reorganizing itself around that one thing with the same metabolic urgency it applies to everything else. If you are female, the change is relatively contained. Your reproductive organs, which shrank to near nothing over winter to reduce the metabolic cost of carrying unnecessary tissue during migration, begin to redevelop. Your behavior shifts subtly. You become more attentive to certain aerial displays, more selective about certain territories, more interested in specific material qualities of certain branch locations where a nest might be anchored. If you are male, the change is less contained. Considerably less. The ruby throat, the iridescent gorget of feathers on your throat that gives the ruby-throated hummingbird its name, intensifies. The feathers themselves haven't changed, but the iridescence of hummingbird plumage is structural rather than pigment-based. The color is produced by the microscopic arrangement of melanin granules in the feather barbules, which refract light differently at different angles and in different light conditions. In the right light, at the right angle, your throat ignites into a color that has no adequate name in English. Somewhere between ruby and magenta and flame, a color that exists at maximum saturation only in living birds and disappears entirely in museum specimens when the light changes. You begin, in short, to advertise. The courtship display of the ruby-throated hummingbird male is called a shuttle display, and describing it accurately requires acknowledging up front that it looks, to human observers, both beautiful and slightly desperate, which, if we're being honest about the biology, it is. You position yourself in front of a perched female or a female who is hovering and watching you, which is better, because it means she hasn't left yet.
The chick breathes.
You then fly in a
visible
precise
as
arc.
a tiny rhythmic expansion.
A shallow
and
U-shape
contraction of the
approximately 1 to
abdomen.
2 meters wide and
Slow
half a
and
meter
steady.
deep, moving from one side
The
to the other
unhatched egg beside
repeatedly.
it
Your
shows
gorget
no
oriented
movement.
toward her at the bottom of each
Camera
arc to
holds
maximize
still
the
in
angle at
macro
which the
position.
iridescence fires.
A single
At the
contour
nadir of
feather
each swing,
drifts
you
down
produce
from
a sound
above
with your tail
and
feathers.
lands on the nest rim
A
at
high-pitched chirp
approximately
created
5
by air moving
seconds.
through the modified outer tail
Settles.
feathers at speed. A sound that is not a
Nothing else
vocalization
moves.
but a mechanical byproduct of the
Speed.
dive, which
Breathing
somehow
rhythm
makes it
only.
more impressive rather than less.
Duration. 7
You
seconds.
do this repeatedly. Back and forth. The arc precise, the timing consistent, the gorget blazing at the bottom of each pass. She watches. She may leave. Females leave frequently. The display that took significant energy to perform is assessed in seconds and dismissed, the female departing for reasons that are, from the male's perspective, entirely
In this
opaque.
sunlit clearing,
Too
every
slow.
flower is a prize.
Wrong angle.
But such rich resources
Insufficient
attract
gorget
unwanted
intensity.
attention.
The wrong branch. A competitor seen in the peripheral vision.
At
The
this
female
scale,
hummingbirds'
we
mate
reveal the
selection
ultimate
criteria
tool
have
of
been shaped by
survival,
millions of
a
years of
forked
selection
tip
for qualities
designed
that
to trap
correlate with
life's
genetic
sweetest
fitness,
reward.
foraging ability, and territorial quality. She is not being arbitrary, even when it looks arbitrary. If she stays, you escalate. Let's establish what happens to you every single night, stated without softening. Your body temperature, which during active flight reaches 40 to 41 degrees Celsius, the upper range of normal avian body temperature, drops to somewhere between 8 and 20 degrees Celsius. In extreme cases, in cold nights at high altitude, it has been recorded dropping to within a few degrees of ambient air temperature, which in some hummingbird habitats means approaching freezing. Your heart rate, which at peak flight activity reaches 1,200 beats per minute, falls to somewhere between 50 and 180 beats per minute, a reduction of up to 95%. Your breathing slows to a rate so low it is sometimes undetectable without instruments. Your metabolic rate drops to roughly 5 to 10% of its daytime resting value. You do not respond to touch. You do not respond to sound. You cannot be roused by the normal stimuli that wake a sleeping bird. If you are picked up, as early naturalists occasionally did, finding what they assumed were dead hummingbirds on cold mornings, you hang limply, warm to the touch only relative to the surrounding air, showing none of the alert startle response of a bird that is merely sleeping. You are, by most functional definitions of the word, not conscious. And you do this every night. Voluntarily. Because the alternative is worse. To understand why torpor exists, you need to understand the specific arithmetic of the hummingbird's overnight energy problem. You weigh approximately 3 grams at your lightest and perhaps 4 to 5 grams at your heaviest, in the late afternoon feeding peak when your crop is full and your glycogen stores are at maximum. The difference between those numbers, 1 to 2 grams of fuel, is everything you have to work with between your last flower of the evening and your first flower of the morning. During normal sleep, a bird maintains its full body temperature. Maintaining body temperature in a small animal is expensive, the physics of heat loss scale with surface area relative to volume, and small animals lose heat disproportionately fast. A sleeping hummingbird maintaining 40 degrees Celsius on a cool night would burn
visible
through
as
its
a
entire
tiny
overnight
rhythmic
energy reserve in
expansion and
approximately
contraction
2
of
to
the
3
abdomen.
hours.
Slow
The night
and
is
steady.
12 hours long.
The unhatched egg
The math
beside
does
it
not
shows
work.
no movement.
It has never worked.
Camera holds still in macro
A hummingbird
position.
that tried to sleep normally,
A single
maintaining full
contour
body
feather
temperature
drifts
through a
down
12-hour
from
night,
above
would be
and
dead before
lands
midnight.
on the nest rim
Torpor
at
is the solution
approximately 5
evolution arrived at
seconds.
after, presumably,
Settles.
a very long
Nothing
period
else
during
moves.
which the solutions that didn't work
Speed.
were eliminated
Breathing
along with the
rhythm
birds
only.
that tried them.
Duration.
It is not a sleep
7
state.
seconds.
It is categorically different from sleep in ways that matter physiologically. Sleep is a neurological state that occurs at normal body temperature with normal metabolic function. Torpor is a controlled suppression of metabolic function so extreme that the comparison to sleep is almost misleading. It is closer, in some measurable respects, to the hibernation of bears and ground squirrels, compressed
In this
into a
sunlit
nightly
clearing,
cycle rather than a
every
seasonal
flower
one.
is a prize.
The energy
But
savings
such
are
rich
substantial.
resources attract unwanted
A
attention.
hummingbird in torpor uses approximately 50 times less energy per hour than a hummingbird in normal resting state.
At this scale,
The 1
we
to 2
reveal
grams
the
of fuel
ultimate
that
tool
would
of
last 2 hours
survival,
at normal
a
overnight
forked
metabolic
tip
rate lasts the
designed
full
to trap
12-hour night
life's
in torpor,
sweetest
with a
reward.
small reserve remaining for the rewarming process at dawn. The math, with Torpor, works. Just barely. Every night. Sometime in late July or August, something shifts. Not in the weather, not yet. The days are still warm, the flowers still producing, your territory still functioning as it has all summer. The shift is internal, hormonal, triggered again by that same hypothalamic light meter that started the breeding season months ago. The days are getting shorter. The ratio of light to dark has crossed a threshold. And your body, reading that signal with the same precision it applies to everything else, begins preparing for something it has never done before. If this is your first autumn, you have no memory of migration. You have no learned route, no experienced guidance, no older bird showing you the way. Hummingbirds do not migrate in flocks. They do not follow parents or conspecifics. Each bird navigates independently, alone, using a constellation of internal instruments. A magnetic compass sensitive to the Earth's geomagnetic field, a star compass calibrated during the clear nights of late summer when the young bird watches the rotation of the night sky and identifies the axis around which it turns, a sun compass that uses the position and arc of the sun to establish direction relative to time of day. These instruments were not learned. They were inherited. Encoded in the genome, expressed in the developing brain, calibrated by experience in the weeks before departure. You did not choose to have them. You did not study for them. They are simply present, the way your wings are present, the way your tongue is present, biological equipment installed before you needed it, ready when you do. The direction they point, in late summer, is south-southwest. You follow. But before you follow, you eat. The weeks before migration departure are characterized by a behavioral shift called hyperphagia, literally, excessive eating, during which your foraging intensity increases beyond even the elevated levels of the breeding season. You are no longer simply maintaining your daily energy budget. You are accumulating fat reserves at a rate your body is not normally asked to sustain, converting nectar calories to subcutaneous and visceral fat with an efficiency that would, in a different context, be considered a metabolic disorder.
Slow and steady.
You are, in the most literal sense, fueling up.
Shows no movement.
A ruby-throated hummingbird in pre-migratory hyperphagia can increase its body weight by 25 to 40% in the weeks before departure.
And lands.
Going from a lean seasonal weight of approximately 3 grams to a pre-migration weight of 4.5 to 6 grams, the difference stored almost entirely as fat.
Speed.
Fat is the preferred fuel for sustained long-distance flight because it contains roughly twice the caloric energy per gram as carbohydrate, the same logic that makes it the fuel of choice for sustained endurance athletes, and the reason migratory birds load fat rather than glycogen for long crossings. The fat accumulates in specific depots. Beneath the skin of the abdomen and chest, around the organs, in the furculum, the wishbone-shaped structure at the base of the neck that in well-fueled migrants becomes visibly yellow with stored fat.
In this sunlit clearing,
a hummingbird
every
at peak
flower
pre-migration
is a prize.
fueling looks, to
But
an
such
experienced
rich
bander who
resources
holds one in
attract
hand,
unwanted
slightly
attention.
roly-poly, rounder than the same bird in summer breeding condition, the fat deposits palpable under the feathers.
At this scale,
This is what
we
800
reveal the
kilometers
ultimate
of
tool
open
of
ocean
survival,
requires.
a forked tip,
You
designed
leave
to
when the
trap
internal
life's
calendar says
sweetest
to leave.
reward.
A combination of day length, fat store level, and weather pattern, specifically the passage of a cold front bringing north or northwest winds that will assist a southbound departure. You do not wait for a convenient moment. You do not deliberate. The instruments say go, the fuel tank is full enough, the wind is favorable, and you go.